I've noticed my recent retrospectives have been rather on the negative side. Even with Chaos Legion, a game that I actually like, it felt like I was ripping into it a bit. But that's unfortunately the dangers of diving back into old, forgotten retro games. Many of them are forgotten for a reason. So as a bit of a palate cleanser, let's look at something that I know is good. Or at least vividly remember being good. Please let it be good, I beg you. Genji Dawn of the Samurai, or simply Genji in PAL regions, was a hack-and-slash adventure game that released in the latter half of 2005 and was the first game developed by Game Republic, a small studio founded by Yoshiki Okamoto, previously of Capcom fame. The game sold okay for the time, considering the ridiculously staggered release schedules and the fact that it was a basically unknown developer, but it's a game with very little staying power that fell off into obscurity rather fast. But Sony greenlit a sequel for the PS3, so there must have been something to it. I am the resident gremlin, your second favourite internet gremlin, and today we're talking about Genji, Dawn of the Samurai. Genji takes place after the Battle of Heishi, where the Heishi clan defeated the Genji clan and took over the region, with the help of magic stones called Amahagane. And as the villains of the piece, their rule was despotic, stomping out any and all dissent or threats to their reign with impunity. And this quest leads him to a remote mountain shrine and a young samurai warrior. Saved by a power of his own and aided by a mysterious ninja, Yoshitsune fights his way to the monastery of the Tamayorobito, and the clan leader reveals to him that he is one of the rightful heirs of the Genji. As such, he begs the young man to assist them in overthrowing the Heishi and reclaiming the Amahagane they wield, before they can use them for further evil. Yoshitsune agrees and sets off with the warrior monk Benkei and Amahagane of their own to overthrow the Heishi's oppressive reign before the whole of Japan falls under their control. The best way I can describe Genji is as a historical fantasy drama. The classic fiction writing thing where you take a real-world historical event and throw in a bunch of magic to spice things up. In this case, Game Republic created an alternative universe retelling of the Heike, or the Chronicle of Yoshitsune, or at least part of it. The original tale is much longer, so we basically have a redux snippet with demons, gods, and magical paperweights. I also don't know how accurate the baseline details of the game are, because I sadly don't know the story or Japanese history all that well, but at the same time that's somewhat superfluous because accuracy clearly isn't what they're aiming for here either. We have instead a fun little samurai adventure that's paced like a movie. Note I said paced. Unlike Heavenly Sword that's shot like a movie and paced like an asthmatic running a marathon, Genji feels like the creators probably understood the assignment. The pacing is immaculate, following a tried and true peak valley peak 3-act structure that breaks up the action and stops the game from over-escalating itself. And because of this, it manages to tell a competent if rather short story, clocking in at around 7 hours. That said, Genji throws in enough twists and decent plot developments to keep the story from getting stale over the relatively short runtime, but at the same time, it doesn't over-explain anything and lets the player just experience the story. If you're looking for a deep, thought-provoking story, this isn't it. But if you're after something akin to an old-school B-movie samurai flick with a whole bunch of flashy action, come on in, you're in for a treat. I've also got to give props to the voice acting, because they did actually get Japanese actors in to do a good chunk of the English voice work, which was basically unheard of at the time, but when you realise it was done by Frog Nation, the studio that went on to do basically all the Soulsborne localizations, it makes a lot more sense. However, this isn't the case for all the characters, and they do have some affected accents in there. Now, I have to imagine this is because they couldn't find enough English-speaking Japanese actors based in the UK willing to do work on video games, so they had to make up the numbers. But it does feel a touch weird when you look back on it. Onto the gameplay itself, and I've got to say, Genji is one of the prettiest ugly games I've ever played. Because when you take all the pieces of it, the models, the textures, the levels, the foliage, and look at them all separately, or even just in a screenshot, it looks really rough. Decidedly more than other games at the time. I'd imagine this is because it's from a small studio and the budget probably wasn't very big. However, Okamoto, the game's producer, had his hands in Resident Evil's 2 through Code Veronica as well as Dino Crisis, so would somewhat be familiar with how good a fixed camera angle is at hiding visual and technical limitations. And thanks to the semi-fixed nature of the camera in Genji, as well as where it's positioned, it actually does a lot to make up for the lack of visual fidelity. And because of this, and how frenetic the combat can be, the game actually looks really pretty while moving. Almost like a watercolour. And while the combat is frenetic, it's actually mechanically pretty basic. The game has one light attack combo, one strong attack, and a handful of aerial attacks. That's it. Not many bells and whistles to be seen, but the game does have the little flourish of directional attacks. Say you're facing one enemy and you decide to attack the guy standing behind you. You don't just snap to face them. Your character will do a specially animated attack that turns them in that direction, with Yoshitsune's being the most extra. It's a small touch, but it's the little details like this that always stand out most to me. Also, I feel like calling it mechanically basic is a bit too harsh. A better way to describe it would be mechanically accessible. A lot of bigger hack and slash games are very mechanically intensive, requiring you to memorise combos and various subsystems, how to use them, when to use them, etc. Genji is a lot more chill about it all, giving you a very simple platform to work off of and engage with at your own speed. Chill. Chill's a good word. The game is chill, relatively speaking. On top of that, we also have the two playable characters of Yoshitsune and Benkei. As you can guess, they play completely different despite the simple mechanics of the game. Yoshitsune is a fast attacker, has aerial combos and a dive kick, as well as the ability to cancel out all of his combos and reposition using a strong attack, which is a sliding slice. He also has a dodge that kind of has crazy amounts of iframes attached to it. Like, really crazy. Because of all this, his combat is a lot more free-flowing than you'd expect, letting you chain together pretty gnarly strings on any poor sap unlucky enough to have the health to survive it. On the other side of the spectrum, we have Benkei. Benkei is a powerhouse that trades all of his compatriots' speed for raw damage. He's slow, he can barely jump, but if he hits something, there is a not insubstantial possibility that that thing is dead or very close to it. And unlike Yoshitsune, Benkei has two weapon types to choose from, the club and the naginata. And while they share mostly the same moveset, they play quite differently. The club's biggest strength is that every attack can be charged, even the light attacks, at any point in the combo, and the charged move is magnitudes more powerful than the already extremely heavy hitting he dishes out normally. The only downside is that you can be knocked out of the charge up animation, which is a pretty fair trade for vaporizing someone's entire skeleton. The naginatas, on the other hand, can't be charged, but in return they have a lot more range and are decently faster than the club, and due to how damage works in this game, it's really not a particularly fair trade-off for the clubs, if I'm honest. The final combat difference is that Benkei cannot dodge. Instead, he has this weird shoulder tackle thing that's not got any iframes, but can hit multiple enemies. All in all, I found that Yoshitsune felt a good deal better to play than Benkei for most of the game, but there are a few instances where slow big damage just wins out. Another key difference between them is their traversal options. Yoshitsune can wall jump and grab ledges, letting him reach higher and harder to reach areas of the game, whereas Benkei can break down doors, trees, walls to open up new paths. More on this later. Something you'll have hopefully noticed is the combo meter in the corner, somewhat similar to others of its kind, but tied to how many enemies you defeat in quick succession. The faster you do it, the higher the combo and the more experience you receive. Yes, that's right, Genji has a suite of RPG elements which wasn't altogether that common back in the day. Experience gained levels up the two characters at the same time, so you aren't going to be punished for favouring one character when you are forced to flip over to playing the other. Leveling up does what you expect it to do by increasing your base health, attack and defense. This can also be done using Amahagane shards, invisible items hidden around the game's levels that can be found primarily through the controller vibrations, and this is probably the worst mechanic Genji has, or at least the most confusing. See, it requires 3 shards to level a single stat, and while the shards themselves are shared, the allocation is not. Now, on face value, you'd think this would pose a problem of making one character much stronger than the other if you pumped everything into them. However, the stat buff the shards give is actually really low. Extremely low for something that has a finite resource. And also much weaker than just leveling, so I really need to ask why this is even in the game. It feels like it was designed for something much more significant, but got stripped back a lot in development to the point where it feels vestigial. But this leveling and shard collecting is definitely a secondary form of getting stronger, with the primary source being gear. As you progress through the game, you will find new weapons, armour and accessories around the stages, as well as being able to buy them from vendors throughout the game, with more being added as you progress through the story. It's mostly a number go up type deal, however certain bits of gear have elemental affinities, making them either add elemental damage and a chance to inflict that element's corresponding status, or make you more resistant to it. There's no clear numerical value to all of this, but the rule of thumb is more pips is more good. And in terms of elements we have 4: fire, ice, poison and lightning. Fire adds a small damage over time effect, ice freezes the target, acting as a hard stun. Poison lowers the afflicted's stats and basically only affects you, and lightning stops the target from attacking, jumping, dodging, and also stops them from being able to run. Can you guess which one is the strongest? Go on, guess, it's really easy. This all said, the gear progression is mostly linear. There are some outliers and a few side grades, but for the most part each new weapon is typically more powerful than the last, which leads to the hilarious instance of being given divine weapons by the literal god of weaponry, and then almost immediately having them be outperformed by some random blacksmith in a cave. And that's before we get to the special orders. Special orders are pretty simple conceptually. You trade special materials and a buttload of gold to the blacksmith in exchange for some of the most powerful weapons and armour in the game. There is legitimately a set of swords your shitsnake can get that are only outpaced by 2 other weapons in the game. But then the question becomes, where do you get these special materials? Simple. You earn them by performing successful Kamui counters against bosses. Kamui is kind of an interesting mechanic. The gauge below the health fills up over time, but also as you attack enemies. Once filled, you can activate Kamui, which pushes back all enemies in the fight and forces them to do a counterable attack. If you counter successfully, you will insta-kill that enemy in most cases outside of boss fights. If you manage to successfully counter all the enemies, you get a Kamui ranking and a cool stylized results screen, but ultimately it's just a bonus to your combo meter and the experience it gains. There is usually a pattern for which enemies attack when, and each enemy type has their own special moves. But in encounters with one enemy type, they can all attack at once, requiring only one attack to counter them all, ending Kamui instantly. There is also special animations based on the attack and how late you counter them. It's another little detail that I love this stuff, man. But bosses are where it gets really interesting, because rather than just killing them, it instead does an insane amount of damage. But as the game goes on, bosses begin to change up their Kamui attacks each time you successfully counter, as well as becoming much faster with their moves. Lucky for you, as the game progresses, you unlock extra Kamui gauges and the ability to perform secondary and tertiary activations, which slow down time, giving you more time to react to their attacks if you know when to activate it. I do not know when to activate it. It also has the potential to make boss fights kind of hilariously easy once you get the timing down, but it makes you feel cool, so we'll just let that one slide. 8 of the game's 16 bosses drop materials when countered, with some dropping multiple parts per fight, but you can't get all the special order weapons in a single run. More on that later. While I am aggressively ping-ponging between these two topics, it's worth mentioning the game also has something called Mind's Eye, where you can perform a single counter against an enemy if you attack with perfect timing. What's the timing? I don't actually know. Every time I pulled it off was seemingly completely at random. Probably best not to try and rely on it. With all the equipment and shards dotted around the game world, you're kind of expected to explore every nook and cranny to find them all. But this does unfortunately lead to my least favourite aspect of Genji. All of the backtracking. To collect all these items, you are required at minimum to go through every area and all 3 acts as both characters at least once. Now, on the face of it, that doesn't seem like too much of an issue. However, the act of switching characters isn't as simple as menuing. If you happen across an area that can only be accessed by the character you aren't playing, you must walk to the nearest save point, leave the level, return to the monastery, talk to the other character, walk back out of the monastery, go back into the level, and play it from the start until you reach the previously inaccessible area. This is an extremely tedious affair at the best of times, but is even worse when an area Benkei is needed to open that also requires your Susanoo to platform in it, requiring a second swap and the whole rigmarole that comes with it. Granted, at certain points of the story, the game will have the other character meet up with you so you can swap in level, but this is only on the first visit and does very little to fix most of the annoyance of it. The game only really has 6 action stages, and frankly a good deal of the runtime is spent running back and forth between them and whatever base camp you have set up for that act. And it feels very padded. And that's before we even get to the shops. Each act the game changes their locations, and quite frankly it makes it more annoying to get to. Act 1, the item vendor is at the entrance of the street and the blacksmith is right at the back through a loading screen. Not bad, not great, but not bad. Act 2 relocates them to the very back of town. I timed it. It takes 20 seconds from the save point to the shop, which is a 40-second round trip excluding the actual shopping part, which is kind of a crazy amount of time. It doesn't sound it, but it sure feels it. Then Act 3 rocks around and the shops are in a cave, and it takes just as long as reaching it in Act 2, with the added benefit of you not being able to see where the blacksmith is at all. It's very annoying. But it's also worth mentioning that if this is my only real complaint of the game itself has to be pretty good in general. Finally, we get to post-game content. This isn't something I've really looked at before, because most of the games I've reviewed previously don't really have them, and any New Game Plus stuff they do have could be summed up in a sentence or two. Genji, being a short game, also has a pretty short post-game, but there's still enough to talk about. After beating the game and getting that lovely clear save, you unlock 2 options: Import and Hard Mode. Import mode essentially is New Game Plus, but more in the old school way. Specifically in that all your levels and equipment are brought over into the new playthrough, but the game doesn't get harder. You essentially start one-shotting enemies, and it basically is a victory lap you can use to find all the pieces of gear you didn't find in your first run, either because it's really out of the way or because the game just isn't playing ball. Hello, mountain wall jump. And also, get the outstanding special orders that you weren't able to get because you cannot get all the required parts in a single playthrough, which is, rather annoyingly, materials at the very start and the very end of the game. Very sneaky, Genji. Very sneaky. It also opens up the gates of the underworld, these weird circle glyph things located in each of the game's 3 acts. They are technically challenge rooms in which you have to defeat 100 enemies without dying, but to actually call it a challenge is a stretch. The reason for this is because Benkei, with the strongest Naginata you have available at this point of the game, can one-shot all the basic enemies, and a single Kamui can take out whichever heavy hitter the specific room throws at you between waves. And all of this is to complete the Tome of Armaments, a log of all the gear in the game that the blacksmith gives you to show all the weapons you have and the things you haven't. The latter isn't shown in names, however it is all ordered chronologically, so you can sort of feel out where the missing pieces are in the story. The reward for completing this tome are the most powerful weapons in the game for both characters. However, this is given to you after you've done everything. So all that's left to use them for is for grinding gold you can't use, shards that do nothing, and levels you don't need. I understand why capstone equipment exists, but quite frankly I'd love to use the supremely overpowered stuff for something other than murking jobber enemies like some kind of psychopathic purgatory. Then we have hard mode. Hard mode is functionally the same game, but with one major caveat. You are stuck at your starting power. No leveling, no gear beyond your starting equipment. It is, in the purest terms, a level 1 run, and a full test of your skills. Hi, Editing Gremlin here, slight correction on what I just said. You can get improved gear in hard mode. The only way to do so, however, is to do the Gates of the Underworld arena fights. Otherwise, there's nothing. You can't even get special orders. Anyway, back to the video. Granted, it turns into a bit of a Kamui fest as that outright kills most enemies, but I genuinely prefer this to the typical higher difficulties other games do, where the enemies just become damage sponges and hit like trucks. This is a properly curated challenge. All in all, Genji Dawn of the Samurai is a quaint game. It's not groundbreaking, it's not redefining the genre or an astounding showcase of what the PS2 is capable of, and it's not really the deepest story you're going to find. But it's not bad either. It's decent, plays well, doesn't overstay its welcome, and pretty much all the negatives with it are somewhat nitpicky. It is a great example of a 7 out of 10 game. Won't blow your socks off, won't bore you to tears, but also something you'd struggle to find major fault with. I hope you enjoyed. Please leave a comment and let me know your thoughts, or maybe subscribe if you want to see more. I also stream on Twitch 3 days a week. That might change depending on when you actually watch this video, but who knows, time is weird. I have been the Resident Gremlin, and I'll see you next time.